Hello, everybody. I guess we're doing another Palantir video after all. Was not planning to make this video, just found out Alex Karp, the co-founder and CEO of Palantir, was on Squawk Box this morning. 14 minutes interview. I haven't watched it yet. We're going to watch it together and see what's going on. Let's just jump straight into it with no fluff.
President Vladimir Putin raising the stakes in its war with Ukraine. Putin says he's not bluffing when he says he's going to use all means to defend Russia, including potentially using nuclear weapons. Joining us right now to talk about this and Putin's nuclear threat is Alex Karp, CEO and co-founder of Palantir. And the last time we saw you in Aspen and prior to that in Davos, in some ways you called this in terms of this potential threat. So where are we really at this?
First of all, credit to Mr. Sorkin here for pointing that out. That is 100% correct. Alex Karp was warning from this particular situation years ago. Back in the day when everybody was singing Kumbaya around the campfire together, nobody imagined that this would be a possibility. He was talking about geopolitical chaos. He was talking about aggression. He was talking about East versus West. So to his credit, Mr. Sorkin, that is 100% accurate. There's a lot of criticism that I can share with you about Alex Karp, but this is a spot on. Definitely was one of the only, if not the only guy who talked about what life is going to be like in 2021, 2022, and I think he nailed it. So Alex Karp deserves a lot of credit for that, and I think Sorkin deserves a lot of credit for pointing that out, because that's not the popular opinion, definitely not on mainstream media. So,
well, it was a pleasure to talk to you then and a pleasure to talk to both of you now. When we were talking about the reality that nuclear weapons are on the table 3 and 2 months ago, of course, that was derided. The general belief I had just comes from building a software business and seeing software in action in war, where software plus heroism can really slay the giant. And I know the Russians just underestimated the power of kinetic plus software plus heroism. And then I believe it's a zero-sum game in Russia, and there is no ability for Putin to lose. He can't just fail at war and then retire, which...
By the way, I made a whole video explaining that. Unless you knock out Putin and Russia completely, you cannot win this on points, because he's never going to surrender. He doesn't have that option. That option basically is for him the end of his life. So it's crazy. I know it sounds very weird to you guys. But for Putin, losing this war means not just the end of his reign, but also major threats to his life and the safety of the people around him. So that's a big deal.
Is what we're used to in democracy. Politicians fail, and then we have another politician. And so the reason why I was sounding the alarm at Davos, and then again when we talked to much derision, was simply this combination of American software, the way we build software, plus a kind of heroism that is very unusual, would outperform the giant of spend. And that leads to just this jarring reaction. And we don't want to believe in the West that people would be zero-sum. We're not that zero-sum in the West.
So basically, he's been backed into a corner. He's a caged animal. He will do crazy things that we can't.
You're backed into a corner where the corner is, if you fail, you'll be killed. Your friends will be killed. Your family will lose their assets.
So how do you then handicap what his options are?
Yeah, Karp is right 100%. That's the absolute best description of Putin's situation I've heard to date.
Well,
and what the real possibility of him using nuclear weapons.
What I believe we should do is continue to support Ukraine and begin to engage in a dialogue where we figure out what it looks like for him to fail without having to say at home he failed. Now,
so what does that look like to you?
Well, Ukrainians have to decide. I know, having gone there, that they very much believe that their territory should be respected. I think we in the West should stick by the line that every country should be able to have its own sovereignty over its territory. I don't know, but I do know it's the thing.
I'll tell you what he's alluding to. So what he's alluding to, by the way, the idea here is like, what does Putin need as far as an achievement he can present back home that will prevent him from getting this catastrophic disaster result. So Putin needs a win that he can sell at home to get out of this and stop it. So Alex was asked, so what do you think it looks like? And he's alluding to it, but he's not saying it all the way through, but I'll say it. He's basically saying, well, if the Ukrainians give up on the Donbas area, Lugansk, Donetsk, if they give that up to Russia, which is de facto already controlled by the Russian separatists, then Putin can present that as a victory, and basically the war can be over. But the Ukrainians are not interested in giving up the Donbas, and that's what's holding up this solution from ever happening.
The things that we discussed and predicted that Ukraine would massively outperform have happened. The danger scenario of massive outperformance is that your adversary is backed into a corner, whether that's...
But if he's failing and we need to find a way for him to look like he hasn't failed to his own people, what is that?
Well, we're very good at that in the U.S. We're failing at a lot of stuff, and we convince ourselves we're not. Somebody has got to be somebody who's very good at this. Like, what does a politician do for a living? I mean, I happen to be more on the left. Some people are more on the right. The job of a politician is to convince you haven't failed, and then get your vote.
You sound like Henry.
100% true. 100% true. By the way, I always found it fascinating that him and Peter Thiel co-founded this company, and Peter Thiel is, I would say, much on the far right side of the political spectrum, and Alex Karp is on the left side. And it's shocking to me how they get along despite that fact. And yeah, he's just selling, look, it's all the PR game at the end of the day, right? Politicians keep selling to us the victory. You know how Biden declared victory over inflation after the 8.3 CPI reading, right? How he declared the GM is, beating every other car manufacturer in the world in EVs. So he's just saying, well, that's just the par for the course in politics. It's not Russia specific. It can be done, and it's being done every day.
Henry Kissinger, though, basically we're going to have to give something away. But it's not ours
Henry,
to give.
I don't. Henry, I discussed this with him. He believes that my belief is the Ukrainians decide, but you need someone who's not me. Like, I'm not adept. My job is to actually deliver something that works and win. There are people whose whole professions are to help you explain to your people why it wasn't a failure. I don't do that for a living, but I do know that.
I don't do that for a living. It's actually true. Yeah. It might be so far the best 4 minutes I've heard of Karp speak, including the last two horrendous earnings calls. He might have somebody working with him, or he just has better advisors, but for whatever reason, the first 4 minutes, he's doing really well.
Somebody who does that for a living needs to be very engaged right now, because if you've won something against all odds, whether it's less importantly a tech company, or you've defended I don't actually believe most people in the West, in America and England, really believed Ukraine could win. Right. And in fact, I know they didn't believe this because
I didn't believe it. I'm going to be straight up. I didn't believe it. I was like, how? So, yeah, that's true. Nobody gave them a shot.
To our clients here what the assessments were. But if you've won against all odds, you've cost your family members have died. There's no way you're going to compromise unless it's on your terms.
That's why I think it's gotten so much more complicated.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have to roll in people who are specialized at that. And people who are specialized at are called politicians. That's what they do for a living. And they need to sit down and figure out how do you explain to the Russian people that although you failed, it's not a failure. And there is a way to do that. But first you have to begin. And the beginning part is, look, if you've won something in a negotiation against all odds, both parties have to accept you've won.
Well, first of all, let's just talk about that, which is some people would argue Ukraine has not won yet, and that we're going to have a very difficult winter, right? That things may sort of calm down or at least temporarily slow down because of the weather, and then we have to see what happens in the spring.
Winning isn't won till you've won, obviously, but you have a perception based on expectations. If I go out onto a football court and am like a halfway surviving linebacker, I've won. And like this, when we talked at Davos, and you asked me what I thought would happen, it looked like, oh, there goes batshit crazy Karp again with some crazy prognostication that will never happen.
Did he just say, there goes batshit crazy Karp again? Oh, man, that is so... I don't know who's been working with him. Whatever it is, he seems more confident. He seems in his element. He seems very self-aware in a good way. He's making fun of himself. I mean, he's being genuine. And even the point he's making is a valid point. Most people said it. It's like, Karp, your doomsday predictions are all fucking crazy. I mean, there's no way. And yes, apparently there is a way. Where there's a will, I guess there's a way.
Ukraine could win, and it could be dangerous because they're going to win. That looked batshit crazy. In fact, that is the reality we're in. And you have to begin with the facts. The facts are they massively outperformed. By the way, this is going to change the way war is fought. Because here you have a tiny country with very little assets, and in the use of software and heroism, you can push off and win against a Goliath.
You keep saying use of software. Explain that.
Well,
this is the Palantir part of the story.
Yeah, the part that we're not allowed to talk about is...
Don't like that part. It's the first piece of criticism I have. I mean, this is war, and I feel a bad taste in my mouth about sitting there and saying, they're winning because of our software, but I can't tell you about it. I don't like that braggy bullshit approach again. Yeah, that's the part in the interview so far. The first time in the interview, I kind of didn't agree with what he did here. Don't take credit for this, bro. Let the Ukrainians have their time in the sun.
You just, in classic warfare, it just comes down to post-World War II. America spends $800 billion, Russia spends, I don't know, $65 billion, but Russia thinks half of it is at waste, and they're willing to do things on the human rights front we would never do. So they think it's parity, right? However, when you use information technology, who's moving, what's moving, under what conditions? Can you identify people from space? How can you identify? Can you unmask people who are trying to mask themselves? What is the action of the battlefield? Where do you put your assets? Where are their most phased assets? This plays in, by the way, into the American strategy of warfighting, which is quick attack, but you have to know where to attack. How do you deceive your adversary? America has been fighting wars, most of which I've been against for 20, 30 years. We've learned a lot about how to fight wars. The thing is that, and so we have this great knowledge of what it means, and part of that is something that is interestingly very cheap to produce, but it really is best produced in the West. Why is software best produced in the West? Would you want to run a software company in Russia or China and get it? Well, you lose it. So,
you just mentioned China. Is there a lesson that you think the Chinese are learning about war and about, to the extent that they're thinking about the future of Taiwan and how that may relate to what's happening in Ukraine?
Every country in the world, including China, and they're like, we should never underestimate our adversaries. These are some of the most interesting, formidable, and creative, intelligent, wise cultures in the world. And they are very much, again, looking at what their expectation was and what was reality. The expectation was probably this last month, maximal, and reality. And then they're, I'm sure, looking at, we're spending gazillions, they're spending a lot less. What is special about what they're doing that's allowing them to massively outperform? And again, in a much less relevant context, why is tech dominated by America? It's like, well, there are all these reasons you have to understand. And with 100% certainty, every country in the world that is big is saying, holy shit, we thought we could just win because we're big. If the people are willing to fight to die, and if they have very specialized, not very costly software and other products and kinetic weapons, tanks, but not really the big ones, they can outperform us and grind us into the dust. And that changes the way the world actually works today.
But here's a software question.
This answer is he's failing to mention the lacklusterness and the underpreparedness and the absolute corruption in the Russian army, which has been a disease over there for decades. It's a relic of the Soviet times. I think one more element that he kind of forgot to mention is that the Russian army is dog shit. It's absolute trash. It's been exposed as such for multiple reasons: logistics, quality of human resources, in general, engineering and stuff like so. Yeah, so that's part of it. It's just Russia had a far better image of the military complex they have over there than the reality is. And he's failing to mention it because he's trying to sell the software, which is, again, I don't like that part of the interview at all.
How do you think about the Chinese in terms of their talents, abilities?
Well, this is, again, we tend to think we are at a massive disadvantage in the West because we won't violate human rights. but actually we have a massive advantage.
And just explain that. The argument is because we won't violate human rights and because of civil liberties, we don't have access to the same kind of data stream.
Well, for example, we would not support something that tracks everyone walking by here and tells us what they're doing during their lunch hour when they say they're at work.
Right.
We just don't. I don't support that. I don't think anyone here supports it. You have debate, but it's actually on international standards in a very narrow spectrum. Some people are in favor of knowing that if someone's a terrorist, you get in debates who's a terrorist, who's not. But no one supports broad surveillance of the Chinese.
He's so relaxed in this interview. My goodness, I don't know what's going on. He's very relaxed and very confident.
Nationalist kind that is supported, by the way, by wide swaths of the world. Most people look at that as a disadvantage. I'll tell you that's an advantage. Why? Because we focused all our efforts for the one area that actually matters, fighting wars. And, by the way, if you're going to build software for that, you need the best of the best of the best of the best. Those people don't want to build companies in countries where you could lose your company. They don't want to build, by and large, it's certainly at my company, we don't want to build technologies that stop us from having a normal social life, including a normal social life means things we're not actually wanting to discuss in public.
Alex, if all of this gives us such an advantage, why have we seen such a hit to so many software companies? I think you guys are down 58% this year in your stock price.
Ouch!
Well, look, bad times are incredibly good for Palantir because you sort out, you get the durable. There's this thing where you've been involved in these things for long years, like Palantir's 20 years old, 18 years old. The bad times really uncover the durable companies. And tech is going through bad times, and there are lots of reasons, interest rates, other reasons. But you will see that the durable companies that come out of this in 3, 4 years, 2 years, however long it takes, are largely going to be from America, largely from the West Coast, and they're going to be very focused on producing things that actually matter. Will this like deadly tidal wave wipe out some companies? Yes, it will. And
what are you seeing?
He should have said here, but not us, because if you look at the balance sheet of Palantir, if you look at how much cash they have, how much debt they don't have, which is literally like insane, debt to assets, assets to liabilities ratio, cash flow, free cash flow, Palantir is not in trouble operationally. In fact, they're doing better than ever, which is what he's talking about, because he's basically saying, well, we're making money and we're growing, so we should be fine. But a lot of other companies might get wiped out.
When we were talking about employment and labor, in terms of your employment and being able to hire talent, what are you seeing right now?
Look, bad times.
How easy or hard it is. Plus, by the way, I imagine there are a lot of employees sitting looking at the stock price saying, I'm underwater, or I have half of what I thought I had.
Well, look, we built Palantir. We are.
It's a great question by Sorkin. Employees that got ESOP, employee stock options, now the comp that they got is slashed by half. I mean, it's an issue.
Private for almost 16 years, and our share price on the non-private market was going down. So, like, these times, in the end, bad times help us also because the alternatives end up being, like, our main competition is I want to be a cockroachholder.com who recruits our people. That's our actual competition. A startup that is 2 days away from failing, but engineers don't know it. Those companies aren't getting funding. And so, like, instead of going to mycockroachtrap.com, people are like, yeah, the stock is down, we're doing crazy important things, and the alternatives suck.
Do you see, in terms of clients, though, right now, spending, I mean, on the corporate side and even on the government side, given what's happening in the economy?
We see a big difference between U.S. and, to be frank, probably too frank, the U.S. is just completely different than everywhere else. Our U.S. business has grown 67% a year the last 3 years, from 233 million to just over $1 billion. The rest of the world, people react. Americans, for all of our foibles, we react to bad times by rolling up our sleeves and adapting. The rest of the world has trouble with adapting at the pace we adapt. So yes, our business is being negatively afflicted by the inability to in other countries to adapt the way we adapt in America. On the other hand, we're an 18-year-old business. The last 3 years, our largest, the American segment is growing 67%, despite me as a front man. So it's like, maybe if we have a more successful front man, we can even.
I like this Karp. I love this Karp. That was spot on, timing-wise. Yeah, give this man a stage. I mean, that was he knows it. Look at his smile. He knows he just nailed that punchline. Good job, Karp.
I'm not planning to go anywhere, but it's like we're despite or because of our various disabilities, we're growing 67% a year in the most important, most interesting market in the world. And yes, we are not growing that way in Germany and France and other places. And
Good. Finally. I think somebody spoke to him, bro. That was good. He wasn't overselling. He said, yes, we're not growing in Europe, which is a known problem for Palantir. Do not hide from it. He was open about it. He said it. Boom. Credibility right there. Transparency right there. Good job, Karp. I mean, except one point so far, I really like what he's doing on the show.
And I don't expect to grow that way. I do think there'll be a handoff. What I think is going to happen is we're going to have a couple years of terrible times. Those companies that are most robust will survive and thrive. You'll get credit for it in a couple years, and the rest of the world will do what it often does. It'll follow what we did well while deriding us for how crazy it is in America.
Do you see a recession coming around the globe? Do you see a recession coming here?
I don't know. It's very hard at all. A lot of that's definitional, but what I do see is that people are scared shitless about energy outside of America. They're so scared about the macro political conditions that no one wants to talk about them. Their enterprises are built for a static, unified world of peace. And the balance sheets obviously are not often prepared for what's going to happen, which I think is going to be pretty bad the next couple years, politically, economically. And then also, that's actually the real problem you have in tech. If you've been raised in an orgiastic environment where you go from high grades in high school to high grades in college to being a billionaire, you've never seen bad times. The worst time you've seen is you can't get a date in high school. That's your bad times.
Oh, man. Good job, Karp. Good freaking job, Karp. I give this interview 8.5 out of 10. This is the best Karp interview and or press conference I think I've ever heard. If he's coached or he's just more mindful to this or he has better advisors, whatever that may be, or this is gonna do well long term for the company. Investors need to see that Karp. This is the Karp we all waited for. Good job. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. As always, if you lasted 23 minutes for this video, it means you're an OG on the channel. If you could like and subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. I know it sucks for me to ask, but I mean, it really helps the channel sustain itself. And that allows me to make free content for y'all. So thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow.